So budget day is upon us, and we here at Wion World is One are bringing to you the definitive analysis of this interim budget. It's got some unusually high buzz surrounding it because it is, after all, an interim budget, not a complete budget, but still lots riding on this one, and we're trying to understand all of that as we head into the presentation of the budget in a few hours time from now. And for that, to take us through all the way to that, we have with us here in our studios Mr. Jasper Reed, joining me with our colleagues, political editor Kartikeya Sharma joining us here in our studios, and of course Sumit Chaturvedi joining us with all the perspective of what corporate India Inc. wants from this budget and how they're viewing this budget. Let's now get this started. Right, gentlemen, very good morning to all of you present over here. It's unusual, isn't it? The interim budget, Jasper, doesn't carry this much buzz. But Kartikeya, you'll be able to help us understand why so much buzz around an interim budget this time around.
So there are three reasons for the buzz which this interim budget is creating, because from the government side there had been source-related information in the public narrative that it's going to be a little more than the vote on account. So it used to be a settled issue that a vote on account is a no-news day. Basically, the expenditure of the government would be presented on the table of the House. Now, when you say it's going to be a little more than the vote on account, a little less than the full budget, then there is a speculation as to what they're going to do. Second, it comes to the conventions. The opposition in India feels that this is breaking the convention because your power is limited to the life of the current Lok Sabha. Once the current Lok Sabha expires, you don't have the power to exercise any budgetary exercise. And lastly, and most important of all, I think it's the three results of the three elections in North India, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh. It has actually shown where the economic focus of the government should have been in past 4 years, which is employment, which is a growth which includes job. Now what is happening is you are having a debate in India about a jobless growth. That's the biggest nightmare. So the issue which is supposed to be eclectic, confined to economists, stock market, business, is now being talked about by the common Joe, and this should worry the government.
Speaking of which, Sumit, we are just about an hour or so away from the opening for the markets. What we understand is that the markets have already priced in the fact that the fiscal deficit target is going to be missed by the government, and missed by about at least 10 basis points, so 3.4% from the current 3.3%. Talk to us in terms of the markets and India Inc. as they look forward to this budget.
Well, definitely India Inc. is looking forward to this as a please-all budget. Well, I have managed to speak to many of them over the last few days. I was in Davos and I spoke to a couple of them. Well, some of them were really hopeful that this will be please-all budget. Somebody, finance minister would like to give something to middle class, definitely rural class, and he will not actually leave the women working class out of it, because women is a big voter base. Well, we all know that. Absolutely. This time it's a window for the voting, in a way canvassing on marketing in itself. That's why they could also get. So it could be a please all budget. Second thing, there would be surprises. They could go beyond the traditional overall norms, and that will be a surprise. As far as markets are concerned, just let's wait for 1 more hour and we'll get our answers. But yes, yesterday they were quite jumping, and as the markets, they behave in this irrational way. There's a lot of buying which happens ahead of the budget, and after the budget, there's a lot of reaction that comes. We'll all wait for that, Krishna.
Absolutely, we all are going to wait for that. Meanwhile, Jasper, we've put it into context as to why so much buzz surrounding it and what corporate India is expecting, markets are expecting, etc., etc. What about the common man? Because this is the please-all budget as Sumit was talking about. It's traditionally been the please-all budget. Do you think that there's a chance that this time around they will, exceed the norm and present a rather elaborate budget?
Every chance, Krishna. I mean, I agree with Kartikeya. Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, MP was a big shock for them, right? And disastrous in terms of timing. I mean, politics is all about momentum, as we know. And so they'll be taking this opportunity, albeit it's an interim budget or a budget on account, to try and regain the momentum. I think that the challenge is, and it's all about timing, they've left it too late. So whatever they put out today is a bit like making kind of promises on your wedding night, right? Perhaps too little, too late. But the common man will be watching this very closely.
Might not be the latest in terms of making promises, because at the end of the day, we are 3 months probably at best away from an election. And every government has tried to do something that can make sure that they retain power. Not many have succeeded.
No, again, I would say that, well, there are two levels to this. 3 months is very close to the election. On the other hand, as Carter Kay would I'm sure agree with, 3 months is an eternity in politics. So there's a lot can happen between now and then. But they lost the momentum, and to a great extent, they've only got themselves to blame for losing that momentum. They're going to have a job getting that back now, whatever they hand out today.
Okay, so Karthik, quick thoughts first of the heads. What is the one thing that you're sure is going to be announced in this interim budget?
I think it's going to more than that. It's going to show us as to where the focus of the Prime Minister is going to be. Is he going to shore up his vote bank with the middle class? Is he going to focus on rural areas, which is now where the Congress has seen a resurgence, the green shoots for itself? There are multiple issues on which the government will have to work. For example, you have the NSSO data controversy, which shows that for the past last 45 years, unemployment in India has actually shot through the roof. And that's the controversy of the day. So you see the backdrop under which this budget is being presented. Generally, when budgets come like this, and if there's an upswing in the mood, you have a different sort of a budget. Remember the budget of UPA in 2014, the vote on account. It came in context of backdrop of scandals after scandal. There are no scandals in the government, but this is coming in the wake of a lot of serious economists and financiers criticizing the government in context of what it could have done and what it has not done. I think that's a serious issue.
But there's some positive also, Karthikeya. If you talk about the GDP growth, it's definitely one of the fastest growing economy. Crude prices, that impacts everyone. Remember, 4 months ago, we were talking about rupee crashing against the dollar. Crude prices now have softened. So lots of leeway also in front of the government to give SOPs. Even if they give, definitely they will be, be prudent enough to maintain the fiscal deficit. So don't you think it's kind of, good times for government also? Well, yes, there's a lot of things where they have not worked, but a lot of leeway because of the low crude prices.
I don't deny that, Sumit. I don't deny that, Krishna, that yes, government has a lot of leeway. But in politics, it really doesn't make a sense, as Jasper said, that you announce all the grand promises when you know that the elections are going to take place in the next 2 months. Then it becomes like an instrumental rationality, if I have to borrow that Weberian phrase. Then it does not have that stickiness to it. It's like whenever the election comes, you talk about Ayodhya. It does not have that emotional connect because people would say, well, you could have done it 3 years back. So now if you talk about that, people would say, well, you could have done 3 months back. So that's where the issue is. You might have the arithmetic and the finances on your side, but what about the chemistry?
Fair enough. At this point, I want to take the discussion out to Sumit. Sumit, budget means that the middle class is watching. Lots of talk about how the middle class anger, so to speak, has been rising. They're looking for something in the interim budget. If it is going to go above and beyond the brief of an interim budget, do you think that there is a possibility that income tax rates could be given some leeway?
Well, that's been a demand, Krishna, and yes, there's a possibility. Income tax definitely can be tinkered with. After all, I end up paying as if I call myself a middle class taxpayer, a large sum of money. And one question this time, which middle class is going to ask: what is happening with my money? Also, if that is going to go to SOPs like this, if they are not getting any quota, nothing, there will be anger, more anger. SOPs are good for farmers. Well, in the long term, what is going to do? This is going to do to agriculture. It's debatable. But as a middle class taxpayer, I would like to ask what is happening to my money as well. That's one question I would like to know from the government also. Maybe there are answers this time.
Apart from income tax rates, the other answer that has also been looking for is a higher exemption limit on home loans, because that is very important. That can also help a lot of people, get more cash from their salary.
Well, absolutely. The theme. The last few budgets have been roti, kapda or makan, and here we can actually bank upon lots of schemes announced by the government, though many of them have not reached the ground. But yes, home being an important part of the dream, middle class dream. Second, real estate is in shambles, very bad. If you talk about the NCR area, the Mumbai area, the builders have been brought to the book. The RERA has happened. Well, we know that. But because of all that, the market has come down. Though in a way it's good because the prices have remained stable. But financially, there are no big subsidies, no big encouragement. So these encouragements could be announced as well, Krishna.
All right. So that's one end of the spectrum. As far as the consumer goes, the urban consumer, the salaried class of the country. Right, let's now, also we have some more people joining us, some experts who can help us understand this budget threadbare. We will be getting you that. But before that, I'm going to go to a quick question to Kartikeya. Kartikeya, apart from income tax and etc., that's the urban consumer. As far as the rural consumer is concerned, the rural economy has not been performing the way it needs to be, apart from the fact that there is the farm distress, the distress of the farmers. And the central government, I think by now, clearly knows that they cannot do a loan waiver like the state governments, because state governments have done close to 1.7 lakh crore rupees in the last, since April. What do you think that will happen on that front?
See, if you look at the announcements of all the state governments, the opposition and Narendra Modi-led government at centre, the announcements are populist in nature. What is happening is, if you just look at the morphology of the announcement, one is trying to outdo the other. So the first announcement was of Rahul Gandhi saying during Chhattisgarh elections that he will give a higher rate of MSP. Imagine a prime ministerial candidate from the opposition announcing MSP, future MSP rates of a state, not even the states, of a state. What happened? Chhattisgarh was swept by the Congress party. It worked like anything. Secondly, immediately after announcing the formation of the government, Congress went for loan waivers. What was the response? Not critical evaluation. Gujarat, Jharkhand, they also announced loan waivers. Now, before an important meeting of the cabinet, Rahul Gandhi has been talking about minimum income guarantee. The economists of the government are talking about basic universal income. So the whole focus has been very populist. I am very surprised if there is some fiscal prudence which will be exercised in this interim budget. This is an election year, and this will be a populist budget given a chance, because many a times the opposition does not allow. Even Chandrasekhar, when he was in power, Yashwant Sinha was the finance minister, Rajiv Gandhi did not allow him to present the full budget. The full budget was subsequently presented by Dr. Manmohan Singh in 1991-92.
Right, very important. Stay with us. Let's now take this across to Jasper Reed. Jasper, so much discussion around it, and etc. etc. You know, there is lots of historical context as well when it comes to this interim budget that gets presented in India just before the elections. The world around will be looking at the fiscal discipline of India, and India's fiscal discipline has been consistently slipping, and it is set to most say that 3.5% is the likely fiscal deficit target that will be announced in this budget. And that's not good news for India. That will not enthuse investors or financial institutions across the world to invest in India.
So here's the thing, Krishna. Fiscal prudence is part of an overall package of economic competence, right? It's one measure. To your point, the government couldn't say at the moment that it's delivered on fiscal prudence, right? And notwithstanding Sumit's point about having a certain amount of leeway, the piggy bank at the moment does not have much in it. So to Kartikeya's point, if it's a populist political budget, they're going to put more strain on the fiscal situation. The bigger picture, of course, is that on various measures of economic competence, the jury's out. So 2 RBI governors have gone on their watch. Once is careless, twice is worrying. Head of the CBI's gone. Head of the Statistical Commission's gone. You know, key advisors have gone. So I think if you're representing the international community, and we're international investors, you look at this with a certain amount of mounting scepticism. And I say, fiscal prudence is one measure, but it's part of an overall package. And I'm not sure, so if you take people like Margaret Thatcher in the 80s in the UK, she had an Iron Lady reputation for strong economic management. I don't think the BJP have delivered on that.
Well, at least that's what they promised to deliver, if not anything else. That's the big question, whether the BJP government in India can deliver on the promise of fiscal prudence. Gentlemen, now we're now being joined by a couple of very special guests. We have Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, Chairman and Managing Director of Biocon Limited, joining us live from Bengaluru. Vishal, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this big day on Wion World is One. Talk to us. I'm going to begin by asking you what your big expectations from this so-called interim budget is.
Let me put it this way, that I would like to see the following that will help India Inc. and the country as a whole. The first, ask is that we want to see a simplified GST, preferably with just 2 slabs, and that would actually help in a big way to thwart the concerns of all sections of businesses. The other ask that I have in continuation with GST is to exempt drugs, diagnostics and devices as well as hospital services from GST across the board, because that will significantly help to deliver affordable health care and this whole aspect of universal health care in an affordable manner. But if that's too much of an ask, then I really hope that at least cancer and diabetes drugs and diagnostics are relieved of GST. This will be a huge boon to patients who have to use these drugs as a chronic, in a chronic condition. The third ask that I would have is to see if we can basically look at startups and the startup economy as a huge job creation potential for the country going forward. And in that, instead of debating on taxing angel investors, I would like to see a tax holiday being prescribed for angel investors, because I really believe that angel investing is plugging a huge gap in VC funding, which is actually causing a huge exodus of startups to other economic regions of the world that support startups. And I think this is where we really need to focus, because startups are actually creating a very large job potential for the country and also providing very, very big socio-economic returns for the government. So this is what I would like to see in terms of angel investing and the whole tax debate that we are having on angel investors and angel investing. The next ask, of course, is for agri-tech and the agri-sector, where I do believe that the government needs to come up with fiscal incentives with which to incentivize farmers towards cooperative and aggregation-led farming practices and technology that actually upgrades agricultural practices. I think this will go a long way in addressing the present challenge that all governments have in terms of giving loan waivers to farmers. I think farmers need incentives. They need to be in the economic ecosystem that actually helps them to be more productive and more prosperous. So these are really what I look at in terms of what I would like to see happen: healthcare, agriculture, startups, and this whole area of India Inc., which wants to see a simplified GST. When it comes to education, of course, there is a huge urgent need to invest more in higher education, in primary education, and of course in science and technology in terms of research and innovation. Right. That requires a much deeper thought in terms of how we go about this, but a larger allocation is very important. Absolutely, absolutely.
Kiran Majumdar-Shaw of Bioeconometer joining us with her expectations from the budget. Kiran, please continue to stay with us. We have more questions for you, but for now we are being joined by Mr. W.P.S. Sidhu, Senior Fellow, Foreign Policy, Brookings Institution, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Sidhu, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Wion World is One on this big day. It's usually not such a big day, but this interim budget of this government has gained huge significance.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part, please?
This budget has gained huge significance, Mr. Sidhu, because of a couple of things like India's fiscal deficit, the farm distress, and of course the rising anger of the middle class, and how the Modi government can retain power.
Mm-hmm. So there are three areas that the international community is going to be looking at this budget again. One of them is in terms of the investments, what's in it for the global Inc. And we just heard about what India Inc. was looking for. And there's clearly an overlap. There's got to be a greater simplification clearly of the GST, although in some ways that's very much welcome, because in the absence of that, there was nothing before that. That's number one. Number two, I think this insistence on Make in India beyond a point is going to be rather limiting. So I think that will probably have to be revisited in some way, shape or form as well. So essentially, if you're looking at it from the international perspective, you want to have ease of doing business, which has improved but needs to go further. Number one, the amount that you can invest, particularly for startups, as we heard again, simplification of a lot of the other norms as well. But there's another set of concerns. India today is also being seen increasingly as a net security provider. And that requires a certain amount of investment in defense. The sense is that if this is going to be an uber populist budget with a lot of SOPs for everyone, including universal healthcare, which is very much required, then where is that money going to come from? And if there's going to be a cut down on the defense budget, that will impact negatively on India's perspective of being a net security provider.
Mr. Sidhu, you very rightly firmed up as to what are the expectations of the international community when it comes to the budget. My question to you, sir, is that obviously any budget right before the election is a very populist nature. So what are the issues you think that the government should avoid this time to make it completely populist, avoidable pathways?
Well, I mean, the tradition is that you really do a vote on account, right? And you sort of, kick the can down the road. So there's lots of things that you can do to make sure that the budget is not populist. One is by handing out the kind of SOPs, which we're likely to see and hear about. Because that, again, is going to shoot up the deficit, and it's not quite clear where that money is going to come in from. So that would be the sense. I just don't see how any government, particularly this government, is going to resist the temptation of being more populist.
This is Sumit. I would like to ask you one thing. The big question is, where is the money going to come from? Because to spend, yes, there are 10 ways, but the big question, where is the money going to come from? The non-tax revenues haven't increased much. After GST, indirect taxes also can't be hiked much. So big question is, where is the money going to come from?
Well, I mean, one of the areas, and again, I'm not an economist, but a lot of people have focused on this as well. The effort to actually widen the tax base can go much further. It should go beyond the GST. And the big elephant in the room is the farm sector. Along with reforms, the sense of, I think India is very unusual in that sense, that it's one sector which is not at all in the tax bracket at all. Now, this is different from providing subsidies, which a lot of other governments do, and there's obviously cross subsidies in that sense, but that's another totally untapped area.
Right, Mr. WPS Sidhu joining us live from Washington DC. Mr. Sidhu, I'm requesting you to stay on because we've got some more excellent guests joining us. We have now joining us Sachin Gopalan, co-founder Indonesia Economic Forum, now joining us live from Chennai. Mr. Gopalan, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this big day, budget day for Wion, A World as One. Right at the outset, so much talk and so much controversy in the lead up to this budget in the form of that unemployment rate that was put out. But big questions on whether the government can use this opportunity to create jobs in the country.
Well, hi, good morning. I think, yes, we are a bit fixated upon the old definition of how jobs are described because, we are really looking at a new economy. There's a new future economy which has new jobs of the future, which require completely different kind of skills. So on the short term, yes, you got to stimulate jobs which are there today. But if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective, you need to be able to have jobs which are in line with the future jobs that are coming up, which means a lot of skill upgrade and skill development. So there should be a fair amount of investment going into those sectors which will give new skills to the young people.
Well, the big question, again, one question which everyone wants to ask is that it's going to be please all budget this time. Very likely expectations of that to happen. But again, as far as the requirements of the funds are concerned, there is little what government can do, little what government can, get the funds from. How do you think government will be able to get the big revenue in its kitty?
We got cut off.
All right, I don't think we have Mr. Sachin Gopalan with us. Sumit, we will need to check that connection and reconnect with him. But meanwhile, we have Mr. WPS Sidhu, and we also have Kiran Majumdar-Shaw joining us from Bengaluru. WPS Sidhu, I have to ask you at this stage, do you think that this Modi government will break the norm in terms of the way interim budgets are done in this country? Because they've broken the norms on many counts. The fact that they broke the norm in terms of the presentation of the budget, the date of the presentation of the budget, so which means that there's every single possibility that this interim budget will be unlike any other ones before.
That's certainly a possibility, and it's just a question of a couple of hours before we find that out. But I want to come back to a question that you've been raising, which is about where are we going to get the money from? Where is that going to come in from? And part of that may actually depend on making foreign direct investment more attractive for India. Part of that we know is a simple fix, wanting to actually remove any kind of limits on the amount of investments that's coming in. Many of the sectors are still very much secluded, partly because of the concerns of India Inc. But then India Inc. doesn't have the capacity to raise that funding either. So I think that's an important element to build up as well. And it's a very fortuitous time globally, because we know for a number of reasons there is now concern about investing in China, particularly in high tech, particularly in the 5G area, particularly in AI, because of Huawei, among others, the controversy over that. So this is a very opportune time for India to step up, open up those areas and sectors where it really still does not have the expertise or indeed the capital.
Good morning, Mr. Sidhu, or good evening your time. I have a question for you related to the foreign community and their reading of the Modi administration. While completely agreeing that more FDI is needed, the conditions need to be improved, what's your sense of how the international community are looking at the apparent revolving door of senior officials in terms of the RBI, the CBI, the head of statistics? How do you think the international community are seeing that in terms of confidence in the administration's independence and or otherwise propensity to interfere?
Excellent question. If we had the norms and institutions that a lot of the other developed countries have, then individuals themselves, their presence or absence would not matter as much. I mean, this is not to say, obviously, that you can have an RBI without a head or the Federal Reserve without a head. That would not work. But particularly in the case of India, the absence of key figures, because the institutions are still very much a work in progress, one might say, is going to have a detrimental effect on potential investors. They're going to look at, the people that they can or cannot work with, or the empty offices, and know how difficult it already is to work through the bureaucracy in India, and how that's going to add on to their concerns as well. So I think they will look on that with some concern, and then look elsewhere for investing.
We are also joined by Professor Douglas McWilliams, Chief Executive and the founder of SIBA, one of the UK's leading specialist economic consultancies. Thank you for joining us. My first question to you is that the Brexit is throwing up fresh challenges as well as opportunities for India. So what budget announcements would help Indian industries take advantage of this process?
I think the first thing that is needed, at least from an external perspective, is a budget that doesn't have too big a deficit. India's got quite a large budget deficit. Its debt position is pretty good. But I think in the run-up to an election, all foreign companies and countries will be looking to make sure that the election giveaways aren't too big. I mean, we're all sufficiently worldly wise to know that in the last budget before an election, there will be a few crowd-pleasing things. It happens in every country in the world, and I don't see why India should be any different from anywhere else. It's a matter of the extent of these things. We hope to see progress on the budget deficit coming down. Otherwise, in the run-up to Brexit, there should be increasing opportunities for India. There is, provided that Brexit goes ahead, and of course we still don't know for certain what will happen there. There is a prospect of a trade and migration deal between the UK and India. It will have to have both elements, but that's good news for the Brits, frankly, because it provides an opportunity for a two-way exchange, and I think it will work well for India.
Okay, Mr. Sidhu, I'll come back to you and I'll ask you a question that, talking about India's image as you sit outside and about India, Make in India has been a big flagship program of the government so far. How do you see Make in India? Has it yielded any results so far? Has it failed, or at least it has made some dent or noise in the global markets?
All right, Mr. Sidhu, we're not able to pick up your audio at this point in time. Mr. Sidhu, please stay with us and we will fix the connection and get back to you with a question. It's an important question. But Mr. Sidhu, we'll just reconnect on that front. But Jasper, we were just listening to that question from Sumit, this entire Make in India.
I think, Krishna, before we go, because I think Douglas McWilliams is not going to be with us for more than 10 minutes, so let me go across to Douglas. My question to you is the UK would be looking up for fresh investments post-Brexit. Now, tell me, India too is trying to boost investments. Why is an Indian budget important for UK and Europe and the world at large? What makes it of interest for the rest of the world?
Two things. First, both India... I'm going to have to start this again, okay? Do you mind? First, both India and the UK want a two-way flow of investment. For some types of businesses, the best investment will go from India to the UK. Some types of businesses, best investment will go from the UK to India. It will be a two-way process. The reason why India is so important in terms of the rest of the world is that India will eventually be one of the world's very largest economies. And it is quite important that progress continues to be made for India to be able to achieve that status. Over the coming year, we're likely to see both the US slow down and China slow down quite dramatically. Now, India is rapidly becoming the third leg in the pyramid, so to speak. And if India also slows down at the same time, that's going to remove quite a considerable amount of momentum from world growth. So we're looking to India to continue its growth, not just for India's sake alone, but for India's contribution to the world economy.
Thank you. You stay with me, Professor Douglas McWilliams. Sumit, you had a question. Finally, we have Mr. Sindhu back with us from Washington. We have been able to make sure that our audio reaches him. So please, shoot.
Mr. Sindhu, again, talking to you. First of all, this Make in India has been the flagship program, as we remember, from the last many years that was meant to garner a lot of investments. Though there are no doubts about it, what is your viewpoint? Make in India, has it succeeded in making any noises across the world, or has it failed completely? Sitting outside India, what do you make out of it?
Well, I wouldn't go for either one of those extremes, but I'd say it really has not made much of an impact. And the simple answer for that is that for the longest time, India has not been part of the global supply chain, so it's coming in quite late into this whole business, and that's part of the problem. There are many other competing economies which can do that in a much, much more efficient way. So there's no real attraction about India. Now, that being said, I think what could work, both for the global economy, but also for India, is if there was a variation of that policy of Make in India for India. Because given the size of the Indian market, there's actually quite a, it's very attractive for countries to want to set up, production units in India dedicated for India. Apple has just done that, for example, for its iPhones. There are others as well. And that stop.
Right,
I think
have your audio again, Mr. Sidhu. We're going to keep trying to connect that. But meanwhile, we have Richard M. Rosso, Senior Advisor and Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies, now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Richard, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here on Wion World is One. It's a big day. It's a budget day. The world is feeling the impact of the US-China trade war at this point in time. Protectionism is causing deep wounds on the global economic order, but multilateral financial institutions have warned against a global slowdown. In this context, can an Indian budget change the mood? Richard Rosso, as we asked Richard the question, we have Piyush Goyal, the stand-in finance minister who will be presenting this interim budget, who is left for the parliament to submit the document, the budget document. Meanwhile, let's quickly take this across to Richard M. Rosso, joining us live from Washington, D.C., Senior Advisor and Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies. Richard, talk to us. Can an Indian budget change the mood at a time when the world has been warned against a complete slowdown?
I don't think it's going to change the mood. We've seen, good dating back to last year's budget, when India increased customs duties in almost 50 different product groups, and in fact a couple of other steps done even since last year's budget to increase customs duties in some sectors in between. So I don't think India's mood is necessarily one that's going to arbitrate this global trade war, and in fact in a small way has been feeding a bit of fuel to the fire. So I don't expect this is going to have any role in initiating a global ceasefire, and may in fact make things worse if they decide to go a little deeper.
Right, Richard, as we speak, Piyush Goyal, the stand-in finance minister who will be presenting the interim budget, has left for the North Bloc. Those are the visuals on your screens, the latest visuals of Piyush Goyal, the stand-in finance minister, keep in mind, who has been tasked with the presentation of this interim budget. And visuals of it coming through to you. We are keeping an eye of every single development here on Wion World is One, and we are bringing to you all the analysis, all the expectations leading up to this interim budget, which has some serious buzz and hype surrounding it. We have Sachin Gopalan now, co-founder of the Indonesian Economic Forum, now joining us live from Chennai. Sachin, good to have you back here on this broadcast. Mr. Piyush Goyal, the stand-in finance minister, has left for North Bloc to present. Talk to us. We continue discussing so many things. There is Make in India. There is this is a sort of a culmination of the economic reforms ushered in by the Modi government. So in that context as well, it will be interesting to see where the Modi government takes policy from here on.
Well, I agree. There's been a quantum change in the approach of how the government has looked at creating jobs, because, at the core of every economy, if you want social progress, you need jobs. That's what keeps people happy, people away from trouble, and focused on, a better future. So I think the current government's approach has been completely different from anything in the past. And looking at the kind of high-tech industries that we are focused on, India's getting better at so many of the other high-tech industries. I think that would be the way to go. And I think the government's programs need to have a lot of continuity. That's the most important word, because it's not just about having a program now and then having to, look at ways to implement it. But there should be continuity, which will take forward and bring these objectives to life.
Sachin Gopalan, co-founder of Indonesia Economic Forum, joining us live from Chennai. Piyush Goyal, the stand-in finance minister, is walking into the Ministry of Finance building in North Bloc, in India's capital, New Delhi. We're all getting set for the presentation of the interim budget, and Wion World is One is bringing to you some serious build-up to that, Jasper, serious build-up to this budget. Piyush Goyal is inside. Not very often does India's interim budget kind of gets this media attention as well, isn't it? Like this bit-by-bit coverage, because everybody knows this is not the big budget, and everybody knows it will be colored by the politics surrounding it.
Well, completely, but here it's in the context of budgets, whether interim or full, being part of the great Indian political psychodrama, and frankly, we're all complicit, aren't we? In propping that up.
Are we complicit? Are we?
I think here we are. I think we are.
This sometimes, I agree with Jasper that political memory is very, very short. So, if you recall what happened on 3rd of February in 2004, Jasper, you would be surprised. This is not the first time the interim budget has come, because many tricks in this government belong to the Vajpayee era. You know, it looks so long time back, 15 years back. People forget that even Jaswant Singh presented an interim budget. So now let me read this to you. Sumit would remember.
Yes.
Now, Jaswant Singh made changes in income tax. He made changes in couple of areas. For example, he in the interim budget, he post duty, custom duty, non-farm goods, indirect direct taxes. He made some changes in that. For example, on non-farm goods, he reduced the duty from 25 to 20%. Now, special additional duty on custom was abolished, which was 4%. And he lowered customs duty on project imports, coal and power sector.
And also, Jasper, last in 2014, it was not that, you know, it was left unattended. Interim budget was there as well. I have actually had the chance to be there. So there were SOPs which were announced because the government wanted to come back. So it's been overall, we can say that one after the other interim budgets have been this kind of windows to announce the SOP so that they could show to the people what will they do. It's kind of a statement to tell people what will they do when they come back to power, and that's what is been seen also in 2014.
And it's easy pickings, isn't it, Sumit, in the sense that 3 or 4 months before an election, you could announce a whole bunch of things, but none of which are really going to have any impact. And all you're really betting on is that the soundbite gets into the voters' mind and kind of stays there and isn't trumped by the other guys. I mean, I go back to Kartike's point about all of the SOPs being handed out to the agrarian community. At the moment, it's the last guy who handed out the SOP that gets remembered.
And it's wisdom in hindsight. You know, for example, Mr. Sinha, who also functioned as a finance minister, actually conceded the point in context of Jaswant Singh and said that, well, the government on its last leg took some liberties, which he does not consider proper. So, you know, who knows that this government might also take liberties. So, as UPA took liberties in 2014, Jaswant Singh took liberty in 2004, the government can take liberty because this liberty depends on how desperate the times are.
And if you go back to 2014, here it's that P. Chidambaram was the first finance minister to make significant changes in the interim budget. So government can take a cue from there. And also in Feb 17, 2014 speech, Chidambaram stated that economic situation at the time demanded interventions that could not wait for a regular budget, but tax SOPs were given.
Well, fine, but I'm not sure that 3 wrongs make a right, do they, Sumit? In the sense of you're describing a glorious tradition of this.
Indian politics, if one has gone one step, you'll go 2 steps.
You know what? Adding to all the quotes that have been given, I'm going to bring in Mr. WPS Sidhu as well on this. A very interesting discussion to adding to Sumit and Kartikeya and Jasper. One more quote: Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister of India and former Finance Minister, the man who presented the all-important 1991 July budget. That budget that ushered in the entire liberalization era. He said a couple of years ago, you know, India responds very well to a crisis. But once the crisis is over, we get back to status quo. You know, that is an interesting way to look at things as well. WPS Sidhu, lots of talk about the SOPs and populist budget, and, you know, the Congress party has presented populist budgets time and again. The Vajpayee-led government presented a populist interim budget just ahead of the elections. Everybody has done it. And in that sense, the Modi government is not expected to break the norm, so to speak, with this interim budget.
Well, absolutely. But also remember, before the July 1991 budget, and you mentioned him already, Yashwant Sinha also presented an interim budget where a lot of these ideas were already there. And it was argued that that may have been, you know, under World Bank, IMF pressure. But it was, you know, many of these ideas were there. And then, of course, Manmohan Singh just took it beyond. But I want to pick up on that quote that you gave of Manmohan Singh. Yes, India responds very well to crisis. The challenge is, how do you move it now from there to also respond to opportunities? Today, we're really in that moment, as we've heard a lot of your experts talk about, that it's not just India, but the global economy actually needs for India to have that level of growth rate to pick up and take along the rest of the global economy. This is an opportunity, certainly not just for India, but also globally. The question is, will India take up that opportunity? And again, you know, it's a little bit of a segue, but you see that India doesn't only deal well with crises, but it also does manage when there are opportunities. And I'll give you one example that the government has been using a lot, and that's the Kumbh Mela. It's the one time that India corporations have together. So why is it that this cannot be particularly given all the other developments globally.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu, for joining us. Thank you so much. So this is a special presentation on budget. Now we are also joined by Mr. Untitled Palit, member World Economic Forum, former Deputy Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, and also Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, Republican leader and business consultant. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. First, coming to you, Mr. Ahluwalia, who's been very patiently waiting for us to come to him. What are the budget expectations? Because when we speak about Modi, he did something very different in his tenure. He got the diaspora support. He got the support of the business community, Indians working abroad. And starting from this Madison Square, I still remember that, the gathering which took place, it really pitched his economic policies, his vision of India at a different level. Now, 4 years from now, what's your evaluation of what the economy should have been or what could have been done, and what do you expect from this interim budget, sir?
First thing is, I would say that Prime Minister Modi came to power with high expectations. And when he came, the expectation was that he's going to create a lot of jobs, and which he has tried. The problem has been that he has a vision of taking India to become a superpower, but the problem is the entire bureaucracy and challenging of changing India, and the mindset has not been there. I believe, and I still feel, that there's got to be continuity. He should be re-elected, and that's just my opinion. And I believe our leadership still feel that a strong India is a strong South Asia and the Asian region. But I still feel the implementation of certain policies, from GST to the demonetization, along with the farmer loans issue, along with the bad loan crisis which India is facing, and the perception of still the ease of doing business is still not there. But I still feel the positives in Modi government to be there, because they're pro-business and they really want to make sure that India becomes a superpower. And at the same time, I do want to say one thing to quickly add is, I also feel the opposition has a problem, because I think Rahul Gandhi needs 5 more years to really become that next prime minister. But one more issue which I feel is concerning to our international viewers and business people is the religious freedom. The fringe elements have to be controlled and contained. And the rights for minorities along with women is a very big concern between US-India trade.
Mr. Ahluwalia, you actually touched upon very important points, but my question to you is from outside, from a perspective which flows from the developed country. Did demonetization help Indian economy, or did it derail Prime Minister's agenda? Because at that point of time, everything was very, very robust, and I'm not doubting his intentions.
I believe it was a very good idea. It was very badly implemented, and I still believe the problem is that there's still an existing issue of the black money, and also the unaccounted wealth which still exists in India and outside India. I think that was one of his big issues, was to get rid of the black money, and he has not been able to do that. And I think he had all the right intentions, but the only thing is the farmers, the smaller business people, the traders, the shopkeepers, they are the ones who got hurt the most, and they are the ones who felt the pinch. And I feel most of the people who had the access to the bank were able to get their money transferred. So I feel it was a great idea, and I still support him on that idea, and I feel most of us Americans do. But unfortunately, the entire bureaucracy and the people have not supported him effectively.
Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, Republican leader and business consultant, joining us live from Jamaica over there. Mr. Ahluwalia, please, requesting you to stay with us. We're now taking this across to Mr. Untitled Palit, member World Economic Forum and former Deputy Economic Advisor to Singapore Ministry of Finance. Mr. Palit, again, the question of the way the world is, India has changed in the eyes of the world. And in that context, what can this particular interim budget do? What kind of signals do you think that the Modi government should look to be sending at this point in time?
Look, I'll be very honest on this. I don't think the Modi government is planning to send a signal to the international community on this, because for the Modi government, the critical question now that faces it is a question of political survival. So when it is faced with political survival, it really doesn't matter whether India is headed to be a superpower or India is headed to be the biggest economy among major economies. What matters is how people on ground in India, out of that 1.2 billion humongous economy, are thinking about making their ends meet. And to that extent, the perception of Modi and his government outside India vis-a-vis inside India have been rather different. In terms of my own expectations as an economist, I would have expected this government to continue on the path of fiscal consolidation, which is extremely important after radically abortive attempts like demonetization and important measures like GST. It's important to keep the revenue flowing and keep the fiscal consolidation solid, particularly given the state of the banks. But what I expect generally, given the conditions in the backdrop of the budget, is that unfortunately the government is going to buy in the bullet of competitive populism and probably going to take steps which would want to counter the current political narrative in the country, which is essentially appeasing farmers, correcting the perception of not any job being created across the country. And so to that extent, probably a universal basic income scheme or a quasi-universal basic income scheme. That's my general expectation.
Mr. Palit, this is Sumit joining from Wion studio. Well, I would like to ask you one question that these SOPs are easier to be given, but who will bear the brunt finally? And as it's said by some people, these SOPs will be financial landmines going forward. How do you react to those statements?
Well, you know, actually, the interim budget is the best place to announce this SOP because you don't know whether you are going to come back as a government. So you just announce it and let it be taken over by the next government, whosoever that government be. But on a more serious note, I completely agree. I completely agree with the fact that if you move to a universal basic income scheme, it's going to consume at least 1% of the GDP. More importantly, it's not something which is going to address the basic issue that farmers' incomes are not rising and jobs are not being created. So there has to be a much closer, effective, integrated role of the markets in the Indian economy. Markets and institutions have to work together. Unfortunately, I think over the last 2 to 2.5 years, the Modi government has actually drifted from that path. And as a result of that, I really don't see much positive happening in this regard. I only hope that at the state level, there are some encouraging signals that we have seen recently, which certain states are trying to do in order to alleviate the situations of farmers and also to ensure that farmers get to have much better selling options and wider pool of customers to sell to. I hope these models are replicated across the length and breadth of the country.